Jamie Cartwright, how you doing?
I'm all right, mate. How are you?
Perfect. The basis of the interview. What's your name? Where'd you come from?
My name's Jamie Cartwright, and I currently reside in Newcastle-under-Lyme in Staffordshire.
Where we find ourselves today. And what about this place?
This is it, mate. This is it. The home of what we do. I thought I'd bring you here and put the kettle on. We're going to have a conversation in Box 12.
And for me, and we're going to have a workout later on as well, aren't we?
We are going to have a workout later on if we can get through it.
Looking forward to it. As was for the purpose of the interview as well, Jamie and I have known each other probably now for 6 years in varying guises, but you've been going through a journey in more ways than one. And I suppose when we were recording this before the third episode of SAS Who Dares Wins, this will come out in the subsequent coming days. But I suppose an opportunity, because it's what I think it's important to give you the opportunity to share really is your journey to the show, reasons for going on it, and a little bit of a chat and a brew.
It's so the episode to air on Sunday, and it's quite a biggie for me. Out of the 21 recruits that managed to get to the show, there's 45,000 applications, and more applications in this show than they've ever had. So the show is growing and growing its audience, and for me to get from 45,000 applicants to 21 in itself was an achievement. However, I wanted to go on the show and actually perform well enough while I was on the show, the third episode I've managed to get to that, so I've stuck around longer than I actually thought I would, but no. So the third episode's a biggie for me, but the show is I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a brutal show. You know,
it's a key Sunday night viewing.
Yeah.
In Scales household.
Yeah, and the purpose of the show is they're trying to condense Special Forces selection into a 10-11 day course, as they call it, and it is a course. It's about education. When you're on there, you're trying to be educated by the DS, the ex-Special Forces guys. But I've watched every other series, the 5 series previous to the 6th one, and I've always considered whether I could handle it. So
by handling it as well, I suppose sporting background, which we'll talk a little bit about later on, from an activity perspective, what sort of fitness levels did you take into that? Because then from 45,000 people, take us through the process before you get onto the show.
So I applied in March last year. So it's 14 months to this point now. I was then told, having gone through 9 rounds of the application process, including fitness tests, psych tests, all sorts of stuff, I was only told 13 days before we flew to location that I was actually on the course.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is bad enough as it is, right?
Waiting. Can't get any extra training.
But the thing is you're also training for months in case something is going to happen. That in itself is a whole conversation about. At 41 years of age, I'm falling to pieces. So trying to train to the level I needed to get on the course, I was struggling with injuries all the way through it. And that's why I genuinely wasn't sure whether I was going to last half a day on the course, because I had a bad knee anyway. The fitness tests are challenging. You know, as you'd imagine, you've got to be able to run a mile and a half in 9.5 minutes, for example, which I thought wasn't that difficult. And then when I tried it, I realised it is more difficult than you think. And that's the true Special Forces selection test.
Right, okay.
Sort of more standard military is 11 minutes to do a mile and a half. So 9.5 minutes. For me, you know, I've got 28-inch inside leg, right? It's not. I'll say it before you say it. I'll say it before you say it. There was various grip tests, carrying dumbbells, all sorts of bits and bobs, and I managed to pass them You then do a master interview, and with it being COVID, it was all through Zoom and remote. That then gets passed to the series producer, who then puts you forward to Channel 4. So Minnow Films is the production company that film and make the show. They go through the whole application process, and then they then put you forward to the Chief Commissioner of Channel 4. I think that's what his title is. But basically, they then go, yes, they're the recruits we want on the show. And so
13 days out.
13 days
you're
out.
on a flight up to Scotland.
Up to Inverness.
Yeah.
And it was pretty odd. We weren't told that. We weren't told where we were going. I turned up, the car picked me up, took me to the airport. And then eventually, when we got in the queue for Inverness, I knew I was going to Scotland then. I think it was pretty obvious, given COVID times, we were going to stay fairly local. 3-hour journey to the Isle of Skye after we'd landed in Inverness. And then we then had to self-isolate for 10 days in a hotel on the Isle of Skye, which might sound heavenly for some people, 10 days on your own in a hotel room. But when you are on the cusp of doing something like SAS Who Dares Wins, your brain is full of all sorts of stuff. And 2 people tapped out in the 10 days isolation. They couldn't get to the show. They couldn't handle this, stuck in a room for 23 hours a day, 1 hour of exercise in a stale hotel room, anticipating possibly the most hellish week and a half they're ever going to have.
Wow.
And that was difficult. And I've documented, I did a video blog of those, and I look back on it now. And there were a couple of 3 days where I was in a really bad mental place, anxiety, panic, kind of, and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, you've got nothing to anchor yourself to. You've got obviously beautiful surroundings of Skye, but if you're out for an hour a day, away from family, away from home,
it's terrible. And we couldn't talk to the recruits because they wanted us to bond naturally on camera. So if we'd have done all that 10 days before we actually got on the show, it would have ruined that element of the show that they like to see us build our relationships. So we would see other recruits, and the only way I know that they're the recruits is because they'd have the military boots on that they were wearing in for the show. So if I went out for my exercise, I could tell that they were on the show with me, but I couldn't communicate with them.
So literally the first time you met these people was at the train?
Yeah. We had a health and safety briefing. Again, every time someone tried to talk, the production staff would go, no, not allowed to talk. So you'd stand next to them, but you couldn't communicate with them. So we had a press shots we did before we went in there, which is the stuff you'll see that comes out on social now. But other than that, when we got picked up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they basically gave us, they said, you can keep your phone on you, but when you're picked up and you get into the wagon to go to location, the show starts. So, okay, so when we then got to that position, the cameramen were all around us, mic packs on, pitch, still dark at 4 in the morning in Scotland at that point. And then that was it. We were in, and when we just didn't know what to anticipate. And
so how long were you on that train for?
We weren't on it for very long.
No.
They definitely cut it, like the train had done a bit of a journey and stuff. Do you know what? I can't even recollect if the train moved. When I saw it back and they showed the train moving, I'm not sure whether we sat on it and then we were just sitting on it. And then I can't quite remember. But then if you've seen episode 1, then all hell breaks loose and then you're in the show. You are very quickly, you're in the show. And then it is a constant state of fear, is the best way, it's my experience, of fear and controlling your fear for the whole duration that you're there. You're fearful in your sleep, everything, you're fearful of everything. And it's layered because you're very conscious that you're going to get physically beasted and psychologically stripped down. But what you don't want to do is be the one that does something wrong that gives extra beastings to everybody. Well, that was my concern. And I've got head like a sieve, as my mum would say. So, your water bottle had to be on you, filled up to the brim. Yeah. It was checked every morning. Your compass was in your pocket, had to be set to north. All of this detail that you had to consciously get right. Yeah. And if you didn't, your burger had to be £40. and you had to put sandbags in it to make sure that it was 40 pounds. And so if someone forgot to weigh it, you'd then be on an exercise somewhere, you've run 5k, next minute one of the DS has got scales out, and you just stand in a row, and you're waiting for someone to be half a pound under, you know? And then if that's the case, you will get beasted.
I suppose that you got from, I suppose, a history of team sports that way as well, not wanting to let the side down.
1 million%. It's you don't want to draw additional attention to you, because you know you're going to get it anyway, and it's going to be bad enough. And then but from the DS, and you also don't want to draw attention to yourself from your teammates.
Yeah.
And ironically, they are your teammates, and you have to work together, but you are also trying to be the last person standing.
Mm-hmm.
So and again, the reasons for me doing the show, from my professional football days, at 16 to sort of 21, the synergy between being a 16-year-old kid thrown into a peer group, having, back in those days, it was sink or swim, break them down and see if they can survive it. It was very, very similar. You've got a peer group that actually you're trying to clamber across to be the one. And then the synergy between that course and what I experienced as a 16, 17-year-old footballer in 1996, 97 was so similar. The problem I had is that, being candid, and the reasons why I chose to apply for the show is because I have a particular distressing story, I suppose you could say, which goes back to 1992, 93. I had my football coach at the time turned out to be, and is now, an infamous, prolific paedophile. And throughout that 2-year period, I was a victim of him. And then at 14, 15, he ends up getting imprisoned for what he did to one of the other lads. And I vehemently denied that anything had happened to me. 18 months, I'm then thrown into the professional football system at 16, where you're fending for yourself, you're away from home. And I just felt like I was holding a secret that I was going to be outed at any point throughout that period of time. And it built a load of anxiety and panic into my life without the already stressful situation of trying to be a professional footballer. Throughout that period, it manifested itself in panic attacks and panic disorders and all that sort of stuff, which I didn't tell anyone about. I just did what I needed to do to get through it all. But in key points in my professional football career where I needed to perform under pressure, I capitulated. I couldn't deal with the stress of the situation that I was in. I was so bothered about being accepted, about delivering, and my mind made my body literally capitulate physically.
Did you find it was manifested as well, I suppose, as time went by?
Yeah, it completely does, and you suppress it, and then it finds its way of coming out eventually. My football career went down the Swanee, you know, and I don't, by the way, suggest that was the only reason why, but it was definitely a defining factor, I believe. And having had professional help since, they've picked all that apart and they've confirmed that it wasn't the perfect mental state for me to go into a very difficult, pressurised situation anyway. But what ended up happening is I then went, no one knew about this childhood trauma, and I lived the rest of my life with it, and did my thing to where I am sort of today and all that. But there was a significant moment in my life where I was on sort of self-destruct mode for a good few years, and dealing with that. And then there was a famous footballer, or he's now more famous, unfortunately, because of his story. But he was a footballer who waived his anonymity. We had the same abuser. And then this was back in 2016. And I by this point, I would be 37-ish, starting to realise that I needed to deal with this because I don't know what would have ended up happening to me if I hadn't have dealt with it. And I tweeted him when he was on national TV, and he rang me, and we had a 10-minute conversation, and he remembered me from those days, and that was the start of my healing process. I then decided to waive my anonymity. I joined the investigation against our abuser, the latest one, the Professional Football Association then offered counselling to the survivors, and I had intensive sort of 12, 14 months of that, and that completely changed my life from the existence I had to how I live now. And interestingly, I kind of had my final counselling session as in the intensive element of it, and then 2 weeks after that, I applied for the show.
Was that a deciding factor? Was that, I suppose,
Yeah.
I couldn't begin, and I suppose many people watching this wouldn't begin to imagine, I suppose, the trauma and the manifestation and that would have caused over a period of time. I suppose going through that level of support, I suppose as each session went through, how did that help?
I've been very vocal with my counsellor. They are life savers. Like they are, you have people out there in uniform services that are very visual, and they are climbing trees and climbing houses and these people sit in front of you in a chair, and they are saving people's lives. And there's two ways I talk about that. There's the literal term of saving someone's life, but then there's also having a life and then existing. And there's two different. That for me is two completely different things, and I see that now.
Yeah.
Prior to having that specific specialist help, I was existing, carrying an horrific burden that had entwined itself into every part of me. And then you are trying to function, but you're functioning carrying this ridiculously heavy burden. Yeah. And eventually you're gonna snap, right? And there was a couple of occasions where I did sort of self-destruct, and that was when I started worrying about myself properly, and then I was like, I need to deal with this. So my 10-minute conversation on the telephone with Andy Woodward, and seeing him stand there on national television and break down like a baby crying and doing that, I thought, if he can do that on national TV, and I'm in this position that I'm in, I can at least go and speak to my mate, or I can reach out. And I reached out to the PFA, actually, Professional Football Association, and then they put me in contact with the FA, and together they found someone local to me that specialises in my sort of trauma. And once I'd found the right person at the right time and the confidence to do something about it, that was when everything started to change. And the show for me represented not the end of healing. Yeah. It was a milestone. Yeah. It was for me to be able to stand on a pedestal, say who I am, rather than hide a secret for 25 years. Yeah. So you can see me for who I am, and then do that on a TV show whereby I'm being stripped to my absolute bare bones of everything of my being. And if I can do that, then I hope that somebody can therefore speak to their best mate about it. It doesn't have to be childhood sexual abuse. It could be any trauma. Yeah. And that's so it was a personal journey for me, first and foremost. And secondly, if as a result of that, I can inspire others to lean into people if they don't feel like they should be feeling, and actually life can be better than what it is, then that's what I hope that the show will do for other people, as Andy Woodward did for me. Yeah. And it's literally changed my life.
It's passing on that experience to help others.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredibly brave.
It's
process
frightening.
both for as well. And at the same time as well is that obviously with friends, huge amounts of support around that, and on the fact that I suppose in what you're doing for other people is that there are many people here with you as you take that jump as well.
Yeah,
so.
which is the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
I understand that now.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it just means that the truth can be a very, very difficult and frightening path to walk down. And the important thing for me is that you don't have to exist. If somebody can just take that step on the uncomfortable path and realise it isn't as excruciating as they thought it was going to be, then they build that confidence. And as they build the confidence, then they start to become open to the idea of going to the pit of their stomach where that emotion sits and start to face it. It takes time, it takes expertise. My experiences I couldn't figure out myself, but it's just that initial. When I told one person, I literally wanted to stand on the top of a hill and shout it. Yeah. And the show became that for me. Yeah. The show gave me that mountain, and ironically, I was on the top of mountains at times. Shit scared, but I was, and it was, it was, and the show itself, I didn't know what I would definitely get out of it, as in, I felt like I wanted to put myself in the position that I had been in the past, where in my mind, I'd failed to deliver, and I wanted to put myself in a position where there was an awful lot of pressure on me to deliver, and that's exactly what the show provides when you're at your weakest. Yeah. And I think I'm hoping that when people see the show, and particularly episode 3 focuses on me, which I'm lucky enough that that's the case, because of 21 recruits, they can only show really 12, 11, 12, so I'm lucky enough to have my story told. But hopefully people will see that I do have a moment in the show which I never thought I needed. And the show is renowned for getting people to those points in a very condensed course, and I didn't know I needed the moment that I have on that show, and it was so profound and so powerful that after it, I literally felt like I don't need to be here anymore. I mean, why am I here? Honestly, I went from this fight mode, and I was fighting every second of being there, and you have to be in that state to be able to take everything that comes at you. And then I had my moment, and on the show it's called The Red Man, and those who see it will see the way that I deal with the Red Man, and the aftermath of that for me. And then I had this peaceful calm about me that evening in the accommodation. I mean, I'm wet, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm battered. I've just been through the most emotionally draining task I could imagine, that I didn't even know I needed to go through, and yet I sat in the accommodation amongst all this mayhem, being completely serene. And it was noted by another recruit. I was so at peace. Yeah. Which was really nice.
Is that because you found it, do you think?
Yeah, I think I talk about this thing that sits in a pit of your stomach. I'd suppressed something so far for so long that even my counsellor had got me close to it, and I thought I'd exercised it. Yeah. But the Red Man incident on the show, the Red Man task on the show, enabled me to go right in there and grab it and pull the bloody thing out. And once I'd done that, it was like this serene kind of euphoric moment where I sat back and was like, wow. And there was a particular DS on the show, Melvin, who's a Stokey. Yeah. He'd heard my mirror room interview, and you'll see it on the episode, my mirror room interview, beforehand, and we got into the nuts and bolts of why I was there, and he used that to rev me into a frenzy to be willing to take a fight to anybody, and that's what I needed. If I hadn't have had the mirror room interview, to then Melvin utilise my historical trauma. He was right in my face, giving it to me full, everything, and it got me to this heightened state of aggressive. It was controlled aggression task. I got myself into this heightened state of aggression, and then it just all come out of me on the Red Man. And then at the end of that, I had this just complete outpouring, which again, you'll see on the show. And then it was that after that, I then sat in the accommodation, and my fight and flight had gone. I then was in this peaceful state, lying sort of in a semi-recumbent position on my camp bed, and one of the recruits just went, "Mate, you look super chilled." And I was like, "DJ, I am." I was like, "I don't know why, but I'm like completely chilled." The problem I then had was I had to get up to the next task the next day, and the fight had gone, but I was okay that the fight had gone. But I didn't want to just go. So the most difficult 2 days I had on the course were the final 2 or 3 days after that. Because that thing that got me there, that I wanted to go and find out about myself, I'd found it, and then I realised I didn't need to be there. I'd had that moment, and it flipped me around. My psychology completely flipped, and then I'm going, all of a sudden you start thinking about, I'm 40 years of age, what am I doing here? And I don't need this anymore. And you start having, as soon as those start dripping in, being asked to then, give your all in physical sense, and then being told that you're a maggot and you're a slug and what you're doing here and all that, all becomes a little bit like, well, I don't really need to be here anyway. And it's funny how that happens, but I didn't want my emotion, and I wanted to override that and just see how long I could go in that state. And eventually I realised that the only reason why I was there anymore now was for everyone else.
Absolutely. I suppose back to the original point around clambering over people in your team mentality. And I suppose you won at that point on the Red Man.
That is exactly right, So when I came out of the show, first person I rang, other than the wife, he said, it was John, business partner by the way. He said, he was like, "Oh mate, why didn't you, you're nearly there. Why didn't you?" And I went, "I didn't need to, mate. I didn't need to." And he was like, "Oh, what a stupid question." I was like, "No, it's not a stupid question. I get the question. But the point is I didn't need to finish. I got what I needed. And I'm proud of what I've achieved. And I'm happy for people who are stronger, fitter, who nailed the tasks to go on and actually pass the course. I'm comfortable with that. I don't need to be this alpha who's got to prove a point. I don't need to be that guy. I'm all right. Do you know what? I'm cool.
Because you proved that point to yourself.
I did, and I was done. And it was... so Melvin, thank God for Melvin, because what he did, and he doesn't show it on the episode, but he pulled me to one side before I went and did the Red Man task, and he was in my face, and he was using some really quite dark stuff about my past to get me into this state, code red anger state, which I'm not sure you'd be allowed to do that in any other circumstance than condensed special forces selection, and you literally went right where I needed to go. So if it wasn't for Melvin, I don't know if I'd have had that moment, and it was massive. The course did exactly what I wanted it to do, and way more. And it is a course, it's not a show. When you turn up, there's never and ever a situation where someone goes, "Oh, cut, can we do that again, please?" It is, you're in Big Brother scenario, the instructors say it as it is, and there's never two takes on anything. Everything's done, and you are in the middle of a shitstorm, and you just got to hang on for dear life. It is relentless. It's relentless. And the show, unfortunately, you don't get to see what we do.
It's impossible to do 24 hours a day
in
an hour's episode, isn't it?
And it's a shame, and they have to tell the story of as many people as they can. But the physical beastings and the lack of food and the sleep deprivation and all of that is it just builds and builds and builds, and then they turn the screw the further you get into the show. So it gets worse. So as you're getting weaker and weaker mentally and physically, it becomes more difficult.
So I suppose it was that pinpoint there, I suppose, at that point of the Red Man task, where I suppose the continual sort of, I suppose, drop in energy, really, I suppose, with your journey that's probably must be going to 1992, really,
100%.
I suppose, at that point, that people will see, or have seen on the show.
And at this point, while we're talking, I've only been talked through it, so I'm aware where I haven't seen it, but apparently it's very compelling and powerful to watch, because of they've managed to capture what I get from it, which is, I'm nervous and excited to see.
Yeah.
I lived it, but to see, it'll be exciting and very nerve-wracking.
I think the anxiety and nervousness is there, but I suppose the thing that's important to stress, though, is that this is your journey. This isn't good TV. This is the fact of your personal journey, and I suppose the purpose of doing the show, the purpose of this interview. Again, I reinforce it. It's been incredibly brave to make sure that, I suppose, your journey can be shared to support other people to be able to pass that journey on, so that people don't suffer in silence, that people don't just exist. They live.
And you absolutely that. And I think I now look forwards. I call it the second half of my life. And I'm going to live the second half of my life. I enjoy the small things. I don't need to constantly be taking big challenges on like I have most of my life. I enjoy living, which is such a nice, euphoric place to be. But I think that, I just think that people, the one thing that I take out, which is, I don't want to call it a negative, but all I say is, I wish I could have said something when I was 14, and I was asked once by a police officer in America, officially once, and I said, if you'd come near me, I'd have punched you in the face. That were my exact words. I remember them clear as day now. I wish I wasn't the kid that was frightened to say something, because I can't get the 25 years back to have another go at it. And I'm not saying by any stretch that I haven't had fantastic times throughout it. But the truth is everything was more difficult than it should have been. The fear factor, I felt like I had an X on my back all those years, and all of that. I just wish I could have, and I can't ever get that back. And the bit that compels me to have these kind of conversations is that if someone does it now, and not in a year, they gain a year. And that's the important thing. That's the important thing, because the time has got to be right. You've got to be ready for it. The help's got to be right, and all of that. But the truth is that's the only thing that I don't dwell on. But I do go, I had a lot of years carrying a lot of stuff that I wish I hadn't have carried it. It wouldn't have been quite as painful at times, and difficult. Things would have been easier and more enjoyable. But I don't dwell on that. But that's part of my motivation
to help other people,
to do the show and to have these conversations. And it doesn't have to be my story, and it doesn't have to be exactly the same as my story. Everyone's got their own versions of things that they're carrying, far worse and maybe not as bad. But the truth is why waste carrying it for such a long time if you can get the confidence to do something about it and start being more vocal.
And the right help and support.
That's so important. So important.
Jamie. Thanks for sharing the story.
I'm
very, very proud personally as a friend.
Oh, thanks.
But I think it's incredible, and as you said, hopefully this helps.
Thank you. Spot on.
Cheers.